The river had always divided the town, but nothing split it open like the day Elijah walked home hand in hand with another boy. People whispered louder than the current under the wooden bridge, the same bridge his grandfather Jeremiah had built with calloused hands decades ago. Funny how a town that once owed its lives to a man's work could suddenly treat him as if he had never existed. Jeremiah Turner had grown old with the rhythm of the river, his back bent, but his spirit unbroken. To the town, he was once a hero, the black carpenter who'd solved what no engineer could, laying timber and iron across raging waters so children could reach school, farmers could reach the market, lovers could meet without rowing boats under the moonlight. He gave them a bridge, and for years that bridge stood as a symbol of unity. Yet bridges, like people, can rot when left uncared for, and so had the hearts of his neighbors. The day Elijah returned, Jeremiah noticed the way heads turned, conversations cut short, and laughter carried a different edge. Elijah wasn't just Jeremiah's grandson, was the boy who'd left for college up north, the boy who dared to love another boy, and worse in the town's eyes, a white one. The irony didn't escape Jeremiah. He had spent his life building something that united two sides, only to see his family judged for trying to cross an invisible divide. It began at the church steps on Sunday. Reverend Cole cleared his throat twice before speaking, his eyes darting toward Elijah and Matthew. "This house is for families," he declared, though his words cracked like thin ice. People nodded, some shifting uncomfortably, others glaring openly. Jeremiah felt the burn of 100 eyes but kept his silence, his hand steady on the worn wooden cane he had carved himself. Elijah, however, squeezed Matthew's fingers tighter, his chin raised in defiance. Later that evening, Jeremiah sat on his porch, the fading sun painting the sky in gold. Elijah joined him, restless. "Grandpa, should we leave? They'll never accept us." His voice trembled between anger and despair. Jeremiah looked at him, remembering the boy who once ran barefoot along the riverbank, who built toy boats out of scrap wood. "Elijah," Jeremiah said slowly, "a bridge isn't built for calm water. It's built for storms. And sometimes the first step across is the hardest." Elijah frowned. "You don't understand. They're not just whispering. They're threatening. Mrs. Harlan refused to sell us bread today. Sheriff Jackson warned us to keep quiet. It's not just words anymore." His voice cracked, but he fought back tears. Matthew stood nearby, silent but pale, the weight of being both loved and hated pressing down on him. Jeremiah's heart tightened. He had seen hatred before. As a young man, he'd built that bridge under the scorn of townsfolk who doubted a black man could do what white men couldn't. He remembered the nights men in hoods rode past his house, torches flickering, spitting words like nails. But he had built it anyway, plank by plank, until the bridge stood unshakable. And now, decades later, the town forgot. Or maybe they had never truly changed. News spread faster than the river's flow. By the next week, Elijah and Matthew found themselves the subject of every whispered prayer, every muttered insult, every pair of narrowed eyes. Matthew's parents disowned him quietly, locking their doors and refusing to answer knocks. Elijah's friends avoided him. And Jeremiah, the man who once held this town together, was no longer greeted with warm handshakes, but with cold silence. Yet Jeremiah refused to bow. Each day he walked the bridge, his cane tapping against the planks, a reminder to all that it was his hands that built what they now crossed so carelessly. One morning, as a group of men lingered near the riverbank, muttering about sin and shame, Jeremiah stopped before them. His voice, though aged, carried across the water. "You all cross this bridge daily without thinking who built it. If my hands were steady enough to bear your weight then, they are steady enough to bear the truth now. My grandson's love harms no one. But your hatred will rot these planks faster than any flood." For a moment, no one spoke. The men shifted, uncomfortable, their bravado faltering under the weight of his words. But pride is stubborn, and prejudice even more so. "You should know better, Jeremiah," one spat. "You taught us to walk the right path. Don't shame your name." Jeremiah's eyes darkened. "The right path? The right path is the one where no man has to hide who he is. The right path is the one that doesn't fear love. If that shames you, then it's your shame, not mine." Elijah, who had stood behind him, felt tears blur his vision. He had never seen his grandfather so fierce, so unyielding. In that moment, he realized Jeremiah wasn't just defending him, was teaching him. Teaching him that bridges weren't only made of wood and nails, but of courage, defiance, and love strong enough to hold weight. But the town wasn't done. That night, someone carved words into the wooden rail of the bridge: "Sinners will fall." By morning, it was the talk of everyone. Elijah wanted to tear the planks apart, but Jeremiah placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, we don't break what they try to poison. We strengthen it." He sanded down the words himself, then carved new ones. "Love will stand." Children paused on their way to school, reading the message. Some smiled, some frowned, but none could ignore it. The river carried whispers, and slowly, something began to shift. Elijah woke the next morning to the sound of hammering. For a moment, his heart leapt in fear, imagining the townsfolk destroying the bridge in the night, but when he ran outside, he found his grandfather already working. Jeremiah, despite his trembling hands and aching joints, was driving nails into the weakened railings, reinforcing the structure as though preparing it for battle. Sweat glistened on his brow in the early sun. "Grandpa, you shouldn't be doing this alone," Elijah said, rushing forward. Jeremiah paused, the hammer resting in his palm. "I've never built anything alone," he answered softly. "Your grandmother stood with me, even when she was afraid. And now you're here. That's enough." Matthew joined them, rolling up his sleeves. He wasn't a carpenter, but he held with steady, passed nails, and fetched tools. For the first time in weeks, Jeremiah saw something in the boy's face, a determination that reminded him of his younger self. Together, the three of them worked as the morning ripened into noon, each strike of the hammer echoing across the water like a declaration. But unity is never built without opposition. By midday, a crowd had gathered at the edge of the river, muttering about how Jeremiah was defiling the bridge with his words, how he was making a mockery of their town's values. Reverend Cole appeared among them, Bible in hand, his voice rising above the murmurs. "Jeremiah Turner," the Reverend called, "you built this bridge to serve God's people, not to parade sin. Take down those words you carved, and perhaps we can find forgiveness." Jeremiah straightened, wiping his brow. His gaze swept the crowd, landing on familiar faces: men he'd worked beside, women who had eaten his wife's pies, children who once called him Papa J. He felt the weight of betrayal heavy in his chest. "I built this bridge for all people," Jeremiah said firmly, "and I will not erase truth to comfort lies. Love is no sin. Hate is." The Reverend's jaw tightened. "Then you leave us no choice. If you will not bend, you will break." The threat hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Elijah felt Matthew grip his hand tightly, their palms slick with sweat. For the first time, fear trembled through Elijah, not for himself, but for the man who had raised him, the man standing unarmed against a tide of anger. That night, the three of them sat in silence at the dinner table. Jeremiah's old house creaked with the weight of years, the shadows long and uneasy. Elijah finally broke the silence. "They mean it, Grandpa. They'll come for us. Maybe burn the house. Maybe worse." Jeremiah's eyes, dark and steady, lifted to his grandson. "If they come, let them see we do not run. A man who runs builds no bridge. He only leaves broken ground behind." Elijah wanted to argue, to scream that bridges couldn't stop fire or fists. But then he remembered the way his grandfather had faced down Reverend Cole, unflinching, and the memory silenced him. The days that followed grew heavier. People refused to sell them food. Children shouted slurs from across the street. Letters slipped under their door carried threats, some scrawled with crude drawings of nooses. Matthew's voice shook when he read them, but Jeremiah calmly folded each one and placed it in a wooden box. "Why keep them?" Elijah asked, angry at his grandfather's calmness. "Because proof matters," Jeremiah replied. "One day, when their hate turns into shame, they'll need to see what it looked like." Still, not everyone stayed silent. A handful of townsfolk, quiet souls who remembered Jeremiah's kindness, began leaving food at their gate under cover of night. A sack of potatoes, a loaf of bread. Once, a child slipped a note with shaky handwriting. "Thank you for the bridge. Don't give up." It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind them that hate hadn't swallowed the town whole. Not yet. Then came the night of the storm. The rain fell heavy, turning the river into a snarling beast. Wind howled, bending trees, rattling shutters. Lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled like judgment itself. Elijah stood by the window, watching the bridge sway under the assault. Water climbed higher, lapping at its wooden belly. "We need to go out there," he said suddenly. Jeremiah rose from his chair, cane in hand. "I was thinking the same." Despite Matthew's protests, the three of them stepped into the storm. The river hissed and spat, black as tar, its fury threatening to rip the bridge away. Jeremiah set his jaw. "If this bridge falls tonight, the town will be cut off. People will die." They fought the storm with nails, rope, and sheer will. Elijah's hair plastered to his forehead, his clothes drenched, but his arms moved with desperate strength. As dawn spread pale gold across the horizon, Jeremiah looked at his grandson and Matthew, pride shining brighter than the morning sun. But victory had a price. From the opposite bank, villagers emerged, their eyes wide in disbelief. They had watched from their windows, expecting the bridge to collapse. Instead, they saw frail Jeremiah fighting to save what they themselves had abandoned. For a moment, shame flickered across their faces. But pride is a stubborn thing. Reverend Cole stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "You think saving would absolve you of sin? This doesn't change what you've done." Jeremiah leaned heavily on his cane, his breath ragged. "No," he said, "it doesn't change what you've done either. I saved this bridge because even in your hate, you will need it. One day, you'll need to cross, and when you do, remember who held it up for you." Elijah felt tears burn his eyes. He had never seen his grandfather so weary, yet so unbreakable. The crowd shifted uneasily, torn between grudging respect and lingering anger. No one spoke further. Slowly, they drifted away, leaving only the sound of the river. That night, Elijah sat beside Jeremiah, who dozed in his chair, exhausted. Matthew leaned against him, whispering, "Your grandfather. He's incredible." Elijah nodded, his chest heavy with both love and fear. "Yeah, but he can't fight forever. And one day, when he's gone, it'll be me standing there. Us, against them." Matthew's fingers brushed his. "Then we'll stand together." Like he did. The days that followed carried both tension and an uneasy calm. The town no longer openly threatened them, but cold stares remained. Children still whispered. And yet, more often than before, Elijah noticed small cracks in the wall of hate. A neighbor who had once spat on the ground now gave a tight nod. A store clerk, silent for weeks, slipped them a loaf of bread without charge. Change, Elijah realized, was like building a bridge. Slow, painful, but plank by plank, it could be done. One evening, Jeremiah gathered them by the fire. His voice was soft but steady. "I won't be here forever. But you must remember this bridges aren't just wood and nails. They're choices. Every day, you choose whether to build one or burn one. This town may never love you. But if you keep choosing to build, one day, they'll have no choice but to cross." Elijah swallowed hard. "And if they don't?" Jeremiah smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Then you'll know you tried. And trying, my boy, is what keeps the world standing." The next morning, Jeremiah rose before dawn, as he always had, and walked the bridge. Elijah and Matthew followed, their hands clasped. The golden sun rose over the river, lighting their faces. And though the town still turned away, the three of them stood tall, unbroken, silhouetted against the light. The bridge creaked beneath their feet, old but strong, just like the man who built it. And for the first time in weeks, Elijah felt hope rise within him, not a loud, triumphant hope, but a quiet, steady one, like the heartbeat of the river itself. The river seemed quieter after the storm, but Jeremiah knew better. Rivers were never silent, they only bided their time. He leaned on the railing of the bridge he had saved once again, his gaze heavy on the swirling current. Elijah and Matthew stood nearby, their presence steadying him, though they were still too young to understand the full weight of what lay ahead. For a few days, the town behaved as though nothing had happened. Shopkeepers no longer shouted insults, though most still refused service. Neighbors avoided eye contact, but the venom in their voices dulled to whispers. Elijah sensed it was not acceptance, only silence, the uneasy calm before thunder returned. Then came the town meeting. The church bell rang at dusk, summoning the community to the square. Jeremiah had not been invited, but he knew the sound was for him and Elijah as much as for anyone. When they arrived, the air was thick with tension. Lanterns flickered, casting shadows across familiar faces twisted by anger and fear. Reverend Cole stood at the center, Bible in hand, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We have let sin fester among us," he declared. "We have turned our backs on God by allowing this house, this family, to shame our town. Jeremiah Turner was once a man of respect, but he has brought corruption into our midst. He defends what is unnatural, unholy. And now, we must decide, we stand with him, or do we stand with God?" A murmur spread through the crowd, rising into heated shouts. Elijah felt Matthew's hand tremble in his. Beside him, Jeremiah stood tall, though his cane trembled under the weight of his body. Finally, Jeremiah stepped forward, his voice carrying steady and low. "If he won't repent, we'll drive them out." The crowd surged with agreement, though not all voices joined. A few townsfolk hung back, their eyes conflicted. Elijah recognized some of his old classmates, women who'd once baked him cookies. Their silence spoke louder than the shouts. That night, Jeremiah's home was surrounded. Men with torches, women with children clinging to their skirts, all demanding the same: that Elijah and Matthew leave, that Jeremiah renounce them. Flames flickered against the wooden walls, shadows dancing like demons across the windows. Inside, Elijah's chest tightened. "They'll burn us out," he whispered. Matthew's voice shook. "We can't stay here." Jeremiah's gaze was fixed, hard as oak. "If we leave tonight, they'll believe they've won. And hate grows when it wins." Elijah snapped, fear sharpening his voice. "And what about us? What about your grandson? What about Matthew? Do we die here just to make a point?" Jeremiah turned to him, his expression softening. "No, Elijah. We live here to make a stand. Dying proves nothing, but standing shows them we will not bend." He opened the door. The crowd hushed, the night suddenly brittle. Jeremiah stepped into the torchlight, his cane striking the earth like a drumbeat. Elijah and Matthew followed, their hands still clasped. "Burn it if you must," Jeremiah said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "But no you'll burn the house of the man who built the bridge that carries your children to school, that brings food to your tables, that saves your lives each flood. If this is how you repay what was given freely, then perhaps it is not me who has shamed this town. Perhaps it is all of you." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The flames crackled. The river gurgled unseen. And then, from the edge of the crowd, a small voice broke the stillness. "Papa Jay's right." A child stepped forward, a girl no older than 10. Her parents reached to pull her back, but she stood firm, her eyes shining with tears. "He fixed my boat last summer. He gave me cookies when Mama was sick. He built the bridge. If he says love isn't wrong, then I believe him." The crowd stirred uneasily. One by one, other children whispered agreement, tugging at their parents' hands. And parents, caught between pride and the innocence of their children, faltered. Torches lowered. Eyes shifted. Not all but enough. Harris cursed under his breath and spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he growled, throwing his torch into the dirt. "But I won't waste another breath tonight." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed, their anger dimmed but not extinguished. Only Reverend Cole lingered, his eyes cold. "You think you've won, Jeremiah. But bridges rot, and so do men." With that, he turned and vanished into the dark. Elijah sagged with relief as the last footsteps faded. He turned to Jeremiah, tears spilling. "Grandpa, how could you stand there like that?" Jeremiah reached out, placing a weathered hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Because fear builds nothing, Elijah. And I promised myself long ago that if I was given strength, I'd use it to build, not to destroy." Matthew whispered, awe and love mingling in his voice. "You didn't just build a bridge. You're building us a future." But Jeremiah knew better than to believe the battle was over. Prejudice was not washed away by one night's fire. It lingered, festering, waiting for weakness. And he, old and weary, knew his time was running short. The fight ahead would belong to Elijah and Matthew. The next weeks brought change, though not the kind one could measure easily. Some neighbors began nodding again when they passed, shy and uncertain. Others kept their distance. The church pews grew emptier each Sunday, as divisions split the town deeper than the river ever had. Reverend Cole preached louder, angrier, his voice ringing with desperation. Yet Jeremiah saw the cracks forming, cracks in certainty, cracks in hate. One afternoon, while Elijah worked by the riverbank repairing a fishing net with Matthew, a woman approached. She was pale, her eyes swollen from tears. Matthew froze. She was his mother. She stood trembling, her hands clutching her shawl. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, "Matthew, I'm sorry." Matthew's breath caught. "Sorry? You threw me out. You wouldn't even look at me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was afraid. Afraid of what people would say. Afraid of shame. But when I saw you on that bridge, when I saw Jeremiah stand for you, I remembered. I remembered you're my son. And I love you." Matthew's anger cracked, giving way to something softer, though pain lingered. Elijah reached for his hand, grounding him. "It doesn't erase what you did," Matthew whispered. "No," she admitted. "But maybe it can be a start." When she left, Matthew collapsed into Elijah's arms, sobbing. Jeremiah watched from the porch, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Another plank laid, another step across. The old man knew the path would be long. Some hearts would never change. But others could. And perhaps that was enough. As autumn painted the trees in gold, Jeremiah felt his strength waning. His steps slowed, his breath grew shorter. One evening, Elijah found him sitting on the bridge, gazing at the river with a faraway look. "Grandpa," Elijah asked softly. Jeremiah smiled faintly. "Do you hear it, Elijah? The river. Always moving, never still. That's life. That's love. You can't stop it, no matter how hard you try. You can only build ways across." Elijah sat beside him, the boards warm under the fading sun. Matthew joined, their hands linked. Together, the three of them watched the river, the bridge beneath them creaking but strong. Jeremiah closed his eyes, letting the sun bathe his face in gold. And for the first time in a long while, peace settled in his chest. The town might never fully love them. Prejudice might never fully die. But the bridge stood. And so did they. Winter came sharp and bitter, painting the town in frost. Jeremiah's cough deepened, his steps slowed, but his fire never dimmed. Elijah noticed the way his grandfather's hands trembled more often, how his nights stretched long with restless sleep. Matthew suggested calling a doctor, but Jeremiah only shook his head. "Doctors can't mend what time has taken," he said quietly. One morning, the townsfolk awoke to find the bridge once again threatened. Heavy rains had loosened the banks, and sections of timber sagged dangerously. The river, swollen and wild, roared like it was ready to consume the structure whole. Without the bridge, children would be cut off from school, families from supplies, and the town itself would be divided more than ever. But unlike before, the town did not rush to act. Fear paralyzed them. If they repaired the bridge, it meant working under Jeremiah's shadow, acknowledging the man they had turned against. Pride shackled them, even as danger grew. Jeremiah, frail but unyielding, rose from his bed and called for Elijah. "The bridge needs us one last time." Elijah's throat tightened. "You're too weak, Grandpa. Please, let them fix it. Let them take responsibility." Jeremiah's eyes softened, but his voice carried iron. "If we wait for them, the bridge will fall. And when it falls, so will everything I've spent my life building. You think this is about wood and nails? No, it's about showing them the way forward. If they won't take the first step, then we must." Elijah wanted to fight, but Matthew laid a hand on his shoulder. "He's right. We can't let fear decide for us." So the three of them went to the riverbank. Jeremiah, leaning heavy on his cane, instructed Elijah and Matthew as they hauled planks, hammered nails, and secured ropes. The work was grueling, the river's spray freezing their hands, but they pressed on. Soon, townsfolk gathered to watch. At first, they stood at a distance, arms crossed, lips tight. But as hours passed, something shifted. They saw Elijah balancing precariously on beams, Jeremiah coughing, but still guiding every step, Matthew hauling wood with raw determination. And slowly, shame cut through pride. A boy from the crowd called out, "Do you need help?" His father pulled him back, but the hesitation was enough to ripple through the crowd. A woman stepped forward with rope. Another man brought tools. By midday, half the town was working alongside them, silent but united, their hands steady as they followed Jeremiah's lead. For the first time in months, the town moved as one. By dusk, the bridge stood reinforced, stronger than before. Exhausted but proud, Elijah wiped sweat from his brow, his chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. Jeremiah leaned against the railing, his breath shallow, but his eyes shone. Do you see it, Elijah? That's what I meant. Bridges aren't built alone. They never were. The townsfolk gathered around. Reverend Cole stood at the edge, his jaw tight. He could not deny what he had witnessed, how Jeremiah had led them again, how the bridge had been saved not by hate, but by unity. But pride still bound his tongue. He turned away, refusing to speak. Yet others did. Mrs. Harlan, the baker who once refused Elijah bread, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Jeremiah, I was wrong. We were wrong. You've given us more than we deserved, again and again. Thank you. Others echoed her, their voices breaking. Apologies were clumsy, hesitant, but real. Elijah felt tears burn his eyes. For the first time, he believed change might truly be possible. That night, Jeremiah sat by the fire, Elijah and Matthew at his side. His body was weak, but his spirit glowed with quiet triumph. You've crossed it now, he whispered. Not the bridge of wood, the bridge of hearts. You've taken the first steps. Elijah's hand tightened around his. Because you showed us how. Jeremiah smiled faintly. Then my work is done. The following morning, the town awoke to the news that Jeremiah Turner had passed in his sleep. Peaceful, gentle, as though the river itself had carried him home. Grief swept through the community. Even those who once scorned him wept openly. The man they had shunned, the man they had tried to break, had left them with something indestructible: the bridge and the lesson it carried. The funeral was held by the river. People came in droves, filling the banks. Reverend Cole, stiff and bitter, refused to lead the service, but the townsfolk did not need him. Instead, they spoke one by one of the bridge Jeremiah built, of the kindness he had shown, of the courage he carried when others faltered. When it was Elijah's turn, he stood before them, his voice shaking but strong. My grandfather taught me that bridges are more than wood and nails. They are choices. Choices to connect, to forgive, to love. He built one for this town, and he built one for me. I will not let it fall. Matthew stepped beside him, taking his hand openly. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one jeered. No one turned away. Instead, a silence full of weight and possibility settled. Elijah continued, his eyes sweeping across the faces. He believed we could be better. That even after hate, we could choose love. Today, I ask you, will you help me keep his bridge standing? Not just the one over the river, but the one between us. The crowd stirred. And then, slowly, people nodded. A murmur of agreement rose, small but real. The sun dipped low, casting the river in golden light. It bathed Elijah and Matthew in warmth, their hands entwined, their silhouettes standing where Jeremiah once stood. The bridge stretched behind them, strong, unbroken, carrying the weight of generations. And though prejudice did not vanish in a single day, something had shifted. The first steps had been taken. The bridge had been crossed. Elijah lifted his face to the sky, the wind carrying his grandfather's words through his memory. A bridge isn't built for calm water. It's built for storms. And he knew then they would keep building. Together, the river roared on, eternal. The bridge stood firm. And hope, fragile yet fierce, glowed like the last light of day, promising that even against the fiercest currents, love would endure. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.